It's Analytics Tuesday, and we'll look at some of the PFF data that talks about some of the positives from Desmond Ridder's debut and discuss whether or not the data matches what our eyes saw from the team's dominant day on the ground in Week 15. But the focus of today's episode is going to be, why does Desmond Ridder, despite a disappointing debut, still continue to get the hype, the love, and the praise here on Locked On Falcons?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, and aka the most humble host here of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners are getting a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in the game store. And guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, it's free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And of course, Locked On Sports Atlanta, like Locked On Falcons, is also free and available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app, and you'll get Locked On Falcons, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, and so many other Locked On Sports Atlanta shows on your Roku or Amazon Fire TV. So guys, today's episode is an Analytics Tuesday, but the bulk of today's episode is going to be a rant towards the end of the episode, talking a little bit about why, the debate between, Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota and even Matt Ryan to a certain extent, and why we continue here on this Locked On Falcons podcast that we're going to look at the positives with Desmond Ridder. We're going to give him a longer leash and the benefit of the doubt that we were not as willing to extend to some of the previous Falcons quarterbacks. But because I don't like to start out the shows with a rant, and those rants tend to go long, we'll talk a little bit about sort of some of the things that I observed rewatching the broadcast copy of the episode. And obviously later this week, tomorrow, I will be able to get the chance to look at the all 22. And we may reassess some of these opinions. But let's talk a little bit about Desmond Ridder at first. At least, we'll be able to do a deeper dive once we get the all 22 on tomorrow's episode. But rewatching the broadcast copy, one of the things that stood out to me watching the game live and rewatching on the broadcast copy was sort of the anticipation that Desmond Ridder showed, right? We talked about that a little bit on yesterday's episode, and we'll see if it holds up under further scrutiny in the all 22. But one of the things that stood out to me was his ability to get the ball out quickly, playing with a timing and rhythm that had not been the case consistently when Marcus Mariota was there. And that's one of the reasons why I noted a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was in that second Panthers game, that despite, all the questionable decision-making from Mariota in that game, one positive sign from that game was a couple of throws that he made in that game that he threw with anticipation, something he hadn't shown consistently in the previous weeks. And we saw this from Ridder in the preseason, throwing with that timing anticipation. And that continued into his first start, at least based off of my initial review of the game. And that's part of the reason why myself and probably several others thought that the floor would potentially be higher for Desmond Ridder in this offense. Obviously, we didn't get to see that come to fruition, but it's still, if the floor isn't higher, then the ceiling still remains higher, in large part due to that. And the fact that we're seeing that right away from Desmond Ridder in his first starts, whether we're talking about preseason or still in the NFL, where the speed of the game and the speed of the starting defenders wasn't phasing him mentally, at least, is a very positive sign, because that was never really something that Mariota showed, whether it was here in Atlanta or even going back to his times in Tennessee, was being this particularly anticipatory quarterback. Mariota's always been a quarterback that operates more off of feel than necessarily, pre-snap decision-making and all that sort of thing. And the quick game was never a big part of what he could do. But obviously there was a little bit of a give and take with that, and we discussed that a little bit on yesterday's episode, that, being able to get the ball out quickly, is a positive, but, it can be problematic because, it led to some inaccurate throws. It led to a couple of times where defenders were able to jump those throws and potentially, get an interception. And again, we'll sort of confirm when we watch the all 22, whether, that was truly inaccurate throws by Desmond Ridder, or he was kind of expecting the receiver to be in a certain spot and that receiver wasn't in that spot. I can think of one particular instance on that 3rd and 5 before the Drake London fumble in the 4th quarter, where he was trying to throw an in-breaker to Anthony Ferkser over the middle, and Marcus May wound up breaking up that pass, and it looked like, he threw with great anticipation on it. He threw it, at least based off of the broadcast copy, before Ferkser really was into his break. But seemingly he thought maybe Ferkser was going to cross the defender's face, and Ferkser was not. And that goes back to another thing that we discussed on yesterday's episode, talking about, needing those receivers to win and separate and all those various things. But, one of the things I noticed looking at the PFF grades that dropped Monday, and we'll talk a little bit more about the PFF stuff elsewhere, but let's talk a little bit about what they tell us about Ridder's performance, was that according to PFF, Ridder was pressured on 31% of his dropbacks in this game, which put him about middle of the pack compared to the other quarterbacks in the NFL this past weekend. And his grade, according to PFF, under pressure was 62. And that was the 7th highest of any quarterback in week 15. And his adjusted completion percentage on those pressured dropbacks was a 100%. And adjusted completion percentage, according to PFF, is basically aim passes, and it's not factoring out drop. It's basically taking into account drops, right? So you're getting credit for if a receiver drops the football, right? So basically what that's telling us is all 3 of Desmond Ridder's aimed passes while he was under pressure were on target. And that's a positive when you compare that to Marcus Mariota. Again, it's not a huge sample size when you're only talking about 3 passes, but when you compare that to what Mariota had done previously, that is an improvement compared to what we saw from Mariota's most weeks, right? Over the course of this season, Mariota has been pressured on about 34% of his dropbacks, so roughly the same. That's the 13th highest. But one of the things we noted in the lead up to Ridder getting the start was in weeks 11, 12, and 13, Mariota was only pressured on 27% of his dropbacks, which was the 7th fewest in that span of games. And over that 3-game span, Mariota's passing grade, according to PFF, while under pressure, was 46 compared to Ridder's 62 on Sunday. And that 46 passing grade for Mariota was the 24th ranked quarterback across that 3-game sample size. And that's not far off what Mariota's overall grade over the course of the entire season has been, according to PFF, while under pressure, which is about 45.5, which ranked 25th in the NFL over the first, 14 weeks of the season. And then when you look at Mariota's adjusted completion percentage, again, Ridder was on 100%. Mariota's was 53.4% adjusted completion percentage, which was the 4th lowest in the league. So Mariota, at least based off of PFF, was not as effective and not as accurate throwing the football when he was under pressure. So that is a positive that you can take away from Desmond Ridder. That was something that we discussed in the preseason, that when we look back at the negative plays from Desmond Ridder this past August, most of those, if not all of those, came when he suffered significant pressure up the middle. And that was a big reason, going back to those conversations we were having in late August and early September, talking about why we were a little hesitant to throw Desmond Ridder out there to the Wolves, given the Aaron Donalds of the world that were going to be able to provide that interior pressure. And so that would not necessarily be conducive to him succeeding. And so it does seem like, again, it's a 1-game sample. We're not going to sit here and say, oh, this is a non-issue moving forward. It may wind up rearing its ugly head for the next 3 games. But at least in this 1 game, it's a positive sign moving forward that maybe those concerns about him dealing with pressure are not as big as we thought they could have been. And at least based off of Mariota's overall body of work and recent body of work, despite improvement from the offensive line, it does seem like, again, based off of a limited sample size, Desmond Ridder seemed to be an upgrade in that regard when it came to a quarterback dealing with pressure. And any Falcon fan knows that if you're going to play for the Atlanta Falcons, you will probably have to deal with pressure on a semi-regular basis. Hopefully it will be less regular in the future as we continue things. So that is something that we will keep an eye on. It's is not to sit here and say that Mariota never was good under pressure. He certainly had his fair share of games where he did grade out better than what Desmond Ridder did this past Sunday against the Saints. He had 4 games where his grade under pressure, according to PFF, was over 62. But obviously that's overshadowed by, 9 games where he was graded much worse than that. So again, positive sign for Desmond Ridder. We'll talk a little bit more about the PFF grades and them seemingly not being a big fan of the Falcons offensive line play and their run blocking, despite the box score, the traditional stats, the analytics are telling us, if we're counting PFF as analytics, saying our run blocking was not great in this game, even though the traditional stats suggest that the run blocking was outstanding and one of the best performances we've seen all year. And we'll sort of, balance that out as we continue today's episode. And then later in the episode, we'll talk more about Desmond Ridder and why we just spent the last 10 minutes, giving him praise, even if the overall performance wasn't great. And we'll get into that a little bit later on today's episode. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. That's the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise, well, guess what, guys? Your dream can come true, and this is definitely the game for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your football team, play through a season, and lead your team to glory. You're going to be hiring the coaches, the coordinators. You're going to trade players, sign free agents, and draft all the players. There's going to be challenges, and it's very realistic. I remember my first year of running this app, we were supposed to be rebuilding, and I felt very confident that we would be a lot more competitive than a rebuilding football team. And we started out 2-1, the Atlanta Falcons, on the Ultimate Football GM app, and then we lost 11 straight games. And I know I had to answer for it with my owner. And you can now finally prove that based off of that, you can sit here and say, you've always thought you were a little bit more knowledgeable about team building than the host of Locked On Falcons. Well, you can prove it now to myself and your friends. All you got to do is download the Ultimate GM app in the App Store, or you can visit ultimate-gm.com. And when you do, make sure you use the promo code Locked On, and you'll get a 100% free boost in the game store. That's promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. Again, ultimate-gm.com. Download it from the App Store. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. And guys, I also want to tell you about the world's largest car sharing marketplace. That is, of course, Turo. And with Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and now in Australia. You can book that spacious SUV or family minivan for that upcoming family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for that special event. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and you just need to get from A to B, or you can test drive that new electric vehicle that you've had your eye on to see if it fits your everyday lifestyle. Many Turo hosts can deliver the car directly to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch the boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. That's Turo.com. So, guys, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen, and always check out Locked On Sports Today as your second listen. Go behind the scenes with Locked On, and subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on all the same podcast platforms, including YouTube, that you're checking out Locked On Falcons. So let's talk a little bit more about the PFF grades. They absolutely have loved the Falcons run blocking this year, probably a little bit more than I have loved them, but they did not love the Falcons run blocking on Sunday. This game, when you look at their cumulative run blocking grade across all the players that, were charged with blocking at some point in this game, this was the second lowest graded game for the Falcons all season long based off of PFF's grades. And that's notable because they have consistently graded out this offensive line, as some of the best run blockers in the league, right? Going into Sunday, Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry were number 2 and number 3, respectively, among all offensive linemen with the highest run blocking grades. They were 99th percentile for Lindstrom, 97th percentile among their position groups in terms of run blocking. Matt Hennessy and Chuma Adoga both got one start this season, so they don't necessarily qualify. But if you lower the thresholds to 50 snaps, which both of those guys played, they would grade out as 97th percentile among guards in terms of their run blocking. Elijah Wilkinson, 82nd percentile among guards in run blocking. Jake Matthews, 69th among offensive tackles. Drew Dahlman, 69th among centers this year. So, they have consistently graded out our run blocking as one of the best. The cumulative grade over the course of the season has been the best run blocking offensive line in the league. But for some reason, they didn't really love the Falcons run blocking on Sunday. And despite that, the Falcons seemingly had one of their best games of the year running the football. They had 231 yards rushing, which is the best of the season. They had an overall success rate on the ground of 69%. If you just look at the top three running backs, those design runs to the top three running backs, that was 72% success rate for those three guys combined, which is the third best number of the year for this team among those top three guys. And you consistently have seen this offensive line grade out in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s from week to week this year as far as run blocking goes. But you look at their PFF grades in run blocking on Sunday, Lyncham was the highest graded. He had a 68. That was his fifth lowest graded game of the season. McGarry had a 65. That was his fifth lowest graded of the season. Dahlman was 52, third lowest run blocking grade of the season. Wilkinson was 43, second lowest. Matthews was 45, second lowest of the season. And what's the reason I bring this up, because when I rewatched the broadcast copy on Monday morning, I didn't really feel like the Falcons running blocking was significantly worse than it had been for many games this season. So it was interesting to sort of see the night and day difference between the PFF grades on Sunday compared to previous games. And this is something I'll probably wind up circling back to after the season. We'll see what the All-22 says, but it's probably not something we'll talk about this week, but circle back to after the season, because one of the things I did last year in the lead up to those year-end positional reviews, and we'll talk about the offensive line, I like to sort of grade out the run blocking. That's not something I do normally week to week. It's a very tedious process and very time-consuming. NFL coaches do it every single week, so shout out to those guys and Dwayne Ledford for doing it every single week. But I can't. My brain goes numb for doing it for more than a few hours a day. So I'll probably wind up, grading out, a handful of games, probably maybe three of their best games running the football, three of their worst games running the football. And probably this game will be one of them that I wind up, circling and saying, okay, I'll definitely grade out this game. But it's notable to me because I remember back in 2011, right? It reminds me of the days when I first started reviewing games at falcfans.com, RIP. And I remember during that 2011 lockout, that was a year where, we had three impending offensive line free agents with Tyson Clabo, Harvey Dahl, and Justin Blaylock. And we all, agreed that Tyson Clabo was a priority re-signing, but it did feel like at that time, it was either going to be Harvey Dahl or Justin Blaylock. We could only afford to keep one of those guys during the lockout. And I remember being on, hashtag Team Dahl, because in those early years of reviewing the games, it was very clear to me how impactful a run blocker he was. That when you looked at those early season games with Michael Turner, whenever he got these big games, it was often Harvey Dahl and Ovi Mahaley that were, really blocking well in those games. And this was before the All-22 became available in 2012. So it was based off of the broadcast copy. And I remember after the Falcons wound up keeping Blaylock and paying him a whole bunch of money, and then looking at the contract that the Rams wound up giving Harvey Dahl, I was even more upset that the Falcons wound up choosing Blaylock over Dahl. And, that's a part of the reason, we're not going to go into, Dimitrov memory lane, bad contracts that Dimitrov gave out on today's episode, but it's notable because when we get to the offensive line breakdown come January and we get geared up for the offseason, we need to figure out, okay, with guys like McGarry and Elijah Wilkinson being impending free agents, are they really worthwhile players, right? Are they really impacting this team? So it'll be interesting to go back and look at some of these games and see, who are the guys that are, having that positive impact when the Falcons are having that rushing success. Who are the Harvey Dahls of this year's unit? And we'll talk when we talk about Drew Dahlman, right? And whether or not the Falcons need to upgrade that center position this offseason. That needs to be a priority. That will be something that we will circle back to. So these are just, me planting seeds for, 6 weeks from now when I'm sitting here, neck deep in Excel sheets, trying to grade out this defense. But that was just something that stood out to me. And so we will probably not be talking specifically about that game, this Saints game 6 weeks from now, but it will be something that will be a topic of conversation at some point. So that was something that was notable to me. But clearly PFF seems to believe that, the Falcons rushing success was mostly due to the running backs, right? When you look at the grades and look at, some of the yards after contact stuff, Tyler Algier, we'll see what happens Monday night, but Tyler Algier was the highest graded running back in the league this weekend, earning an elite grade of 93.5. Cordero Patterson was like top 10 among running backs with a run game grade of 76.3. And so, it'll be curious if when I sit down and really, really study the all 22, if I come to a similar conclusion, I'll be like, you know what, PFF had it right all along, or, you know, whether or not I'll come to the conclusion later on that, you know, these 90 and 80 grades that they've been handing out on a weekly basis for some of these guys aren't maybe as deserving as they thought or whatever. So it'll be an interesting conversation to have later, but that was something that stood out to me when I was looking at the PFF grades from Sunday's matchup. But we'll leave that conversation there, and we will get into probably a bit of a rant here where we will talk a little bit about, you know, why Desmond Ridder is going to continue to get all this love despite the fact that he did not particularly well on Sunday. And, you know, it's part of the whole process behind why certain quarterbacks like Matt Ryan, like Marcus Mariota, haven't gotten as much of a benefit of the doubt from people like myself in recent years as we will give Desmond Ridder, even though objectively, if you want to call it that, Desmond Ridder is the worst of those three quarterbacks based off of this one game. We'll get into all of that as we continue today's episode, guys. But first, I want to tell you about PrizePicks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It only takes less than 60 seconds to enter. And this week, if you want to take advantage of Desmond Ridder's, you know, positive anticipation and go more on his 155.5 passing yards projection, you can do that, or you can go less, given that he fell far short of that 170 plus yards projection from last week. Or if you don't feel good about Desmond Ridder, maybe you can get on the Drake London at 45.5 receiving yards, or Tyler Algier at 48.5 rushing yards. And the great thing about PrizePicks is not you versus other people, it's you versus projection. So literally everybody listening to me right now or watching me right now can go smash more or go smash less on PrizePicks. And it's not just NFL projections. You can get NBA, NHL, PGA, college football, esports, so much more. PrizePicks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you got to do is download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, they will give you $100 to play with. Don't forget that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, I got to ask you a question. Can your Bluetooth speaker hang with the big dog? Big Dog gives you a portable Bluetooth speaker specifically designed in Augusta, Georgia to deliver huge, clear sound, extraordinary battery life, and tons of connectivity options at a great price. Whether you want to party with your friends or you just want to make or take a phone call, it's built to do it all, and it's backed by a 100% satisfaction guarantee plus a 1-year warranty. So go big with the Big Dog Scout, their inaugural model. It has a max volume of 105 decibels, 40 watts. It's waterproof. It charges other devices. You get 15 hours of playback, and you compare to for enhanced stereo sound. The Big Dog Scout is now available online at bigdogspeakers.com at $99, and you guys can get $20 off with the promo code Locked On. You can't beat that deal. So head to bigdogspeakers.com for more information. Visit bigdogspeakers.com. So, guys, this comes from, you know, a lot of this comes from a lot of discourse that I see constantly in the comments here, online, elsewhere, where, you know, people are always sniping back at each other, particularly when it comes to the quarterback conversation. And one of the things I've been working on in therapy over the last couple of months that my therapist has stressed to me is, you know, Aaron, you can only control the things that you can control. Right. And so from my perspective, when it comes to this podcast, I'm only accountable to my opinions that I express on my podcast, the quality of this podcast, my viewership, my listenership, all those various things. So frankly, you know, one of the things that therapy has helped me is not to spend too much time or energy focusing on what other people say and do, particularly when it comes to this quarterback conversation. But this is something, a trend that I've noticed over the last couple of years. And, you know, it's this kind of, I call it a victim complex when it comes to, you know, the hate that quote unquote their quarterback gets. And I've seen Falcon fans and non-Falcon fans express this with Matt Ryan, right, and with Marcus Mariota the last couple of weeks. And I'm sure I'll see plenty of Falcon fans express this with Desmond Ridder over the next coming weeks and months, if not years, right? And I'm sure there are Chiefs fans somewhere that are sitting here complaining about how Patrick Mahomes gets no respect and he's the most underrated quarterback in the league because someone had the audacity to rank him number 2 on their quarterbacks ranking. I'm sure that Tom Brady and Patriots fans have felt like he got disrespected, over the last decade that he was there in New England, because every, time they lost a game in September, people wanted to write those columns being like, oh, is this the end of the Patriots dynasty? Is Tom Brady done? All that sort of stuff. You see that with the discord surrounding Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. So this is something, I bring this up because to me, this is something that is true of all quarterbacks. This is just the nature of being a quarterback, that you're going to have this discourse, right? I just remember Falcon fans for years being like, oh, Matt Ryan's the most hated. He gets the most unnecessary hate. And again, this is an unscientific process based off of some Twitter polls that I've done the last couple of years, here. But like, my conclusion based off of that very unscientific process was maybe 10%, maybe 15%, if you want to tack it on, of Falcon fans hated him based off of some Twitter polls that I did. I think that, that minority of fans was a very vocal group, but to me, that whole Matt Ryan civil war that embroiled Falcons Twitter and elsewhere for the last couple of years, was basically the 10% of the fan base that were haters, sniping back and forth with the 30% or so that were quote unquote lovers, if you want to call that. And then there's like 60% of the fan base, that I would probably, put myself in that I would consider the silent majority. Now, certainly I'm not silent because I have a microphone, but like, those are people that generally have a favorable opinion of Matt Ryan, but just don't spend any time, waking up every day wishing to fight about it, as so many of those other people in the other 40% of the fan base. But, if that's what you want to do, whether it's Matt Ryan, Marcus Mariota, or Desmond Ridder or somebody else, do you. Like, don't let some guy on the internet tell you how to live your life. But I've noticed this happen again with the Mariota stands, which is like, oh, Marcus Mariota never got enough love from, Falcon fans. And, I've seen it in the comments and elsewhere, like, oh, Aaron, you're a Mariota hater. Not true at all, right? We didn't give Marcus Mariota his quote unquote fair shake in Atlanta, but that was because we knew, myself included, that he was a bridge quarterback. That's why back in March, I sat here on the podcast the day that we signed Marcus Mariota. I said, guys, we're not going to talk that much about Marcus Mariota on this podcast relative to what you would expect from a podcast about a football team talking about their starting quarterback, because we know Marcus Mariota is a bridge quarterback. And I have proceeded over the last, 9 months to make no bones about that reality that the rest of us were living in, but a small minority of Falcon fans and Mariota stands were not living in. And the question has not been about, Marcus Mariota, since March. It's been the question since May when we drafted Desmond Ridder. Is he the guy? That has been the number one topic of conversation and the number one area of focus for myself and many others out there in the future. And has that given Marcus Mariota a short shrift? Sure, absolutely. But guess what, guys? It ain't because I hate on Marcus Mariota, or it ain't because I have this great love for Desmond Ridder. Frankly, I don't really care about who the Falcons quarterback is. Yeah, sure, I've said a lot of wild stuff on Twitter about how Desmond Ridder's going to be, is better than Patrick Mahomes and whatnot, but that's just me. That's just Twitter, right? But I will admit, yes, I am legitimately excited about whether or not, answering that question, if Desmond Ridder can be the guy. And I am absolutely rooting for Desmond Ridder to be the guy, and I will give him the benefit of the doubt that I never gave Marcus Mariota. Not because I hate one guy or love one guy, and I lack an emotional investment in one guy and have one in the other guy. It's simply, we have to remind you guys why we are here, and this is my bad. I will own up to this 1,000%. This is part of the things that I can control, and I need to be better about this on the podcast, making sure that you guys know this, right? I've assumed that you guys understood this, but it's been clear to me based off of the discourse surrounding the Falcons quarterback that a lot of people still do not get this. And this goes back to episode that we had in February or March of 2021. After the 2020 season, where a listener sent me an email that basically asked me, like, Aaron, can you go deep into the connection between, quarterback salary and the percentage of salary cap and team success, and looking at the quarterbacks that have won the Super Bowl, because that person had discovered that, like, basically if you made, I think it was more than 12% of your team's salary cap, only all the Super Bowl winning quarterbacks had that hit that number or below. And so I did a deep dive, look at the first decade of the new CBA, started in 2011 to 2020, looking at the final four quarterbacks, looking at their annual salaries on average, as well as their cap hits compared to the salary cap in the given year, and looked at those guys, 40 quarterback data set. And at the time, when Matt Ryan was still here, I was at the time reluctant to admit the reality that is now true to me today that I was reluctant to admit back then. But the Falcons were basically overpaying Matt Ryan, and it was hurting their chances to win, because all that data said roughly on average, looking at that 40 quarterback data set, on average, about 9% of your salary cap could be devoted to your quarterback. In terms of their average annual salary. And you had a couple of quarterbacks in that span of time that, it was 12%, 13%, 14% that were able to make it to the Final Four, but those were relatively rare. Right. And, starting in that 2018 year when Matt Ryan got his third contract from the Atlanta Falcons, he was averaging from that point on about 16% of the Falcons salary cap. And, that's probably, I would argue, a big factor in why Aaron Rodgers, despite being as good as he has been, has never made it past the NFC Championship game, because even in those years where they lost the NFC Championship game, he was counting about 16% of the Packers salary cap. And again, we might have to revise this statement come February, because we'll have new data to sample. But basically what this is telling me, based off of that previous research, that, based off of this year's cap and next year's cap, if you're paying your quarterback more than $25 or $30 million a year, it is not going to help you reach that level. And probably the exceptions to that will be Patrick Mahomes, will be Josh Allen, that are giving you more surplus value than what they're getting. And you just look at the contracts that Aaron Rodgers has, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, and the Browns quarterback. They're all making more per year than what Mahomes and Allen are making. And you're looking at those teams not being particularly successful. You can just look at what happened with Devontae Adams due to the Packers basically saying, if we got to pay Rodgers, we can't afford to keep Devontae Adams, and how much that's hurt their team. And then you look at the next tier of quarterbacks right after Mahomes, right after Allen. You look at Derek Carr and Matt Stafford and Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Ryan Tannehill. You're not looking at teams that are competing for Super Bowls, that many of them. Now, if you want a guy that can help you go to the playoffs each and every year, absolutely pay your guy $35, $40 million or more. He can do that all day. But winning the Super Bowl is going to be hard when you're paying a quarterback that much. Now, you noticed Matt Stafford just won a Super Bowl. I mentioned him, but guess what his cap hit in 2021 was? It was $20 million. Then after the season, the Rams decided to pay him $40 million a year. And so they got surplus value from Matt Stafford when he was making considerably less than he is making today. And then we can get into the conversation of how much having an elite play caller like a Sean McVay or an Andy Reid or even a Kyle Shanahan enhances your ability to elevate, these lesser quarterbacks, the Matt Ryans, the Matt Staffords, etc. But we won't get into that today. But basically, the conclusion I have reached based off of the data I've seen over the last decade, that unless you're getting Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen level play, the only real upside to have for a quarterback, the only thing that makes sense for you to be able to compete at the highest levels consistently is to have a quarterback on a rookie contract, because therefore you're going to get surplus value than what you're getting from some of these higher paid players, right? You look at Joe Burrow last year, who lost the Super Bowl to Matt Stafford, nearly won it, had a couple of plays been made elsewhere on his football team. The Bengals are paying him $9 million a year. That's James Daniels money, guy. And everybody who listens to this podcast over the last 9 months knows how much a fan I was of James Daniels and how much I wanted him to be an Atlanta Falcon. But I can guarantee you that Joe Burrow, being who he is and playing the position that he plays, is giving far more value and helping the Cincinnati Bengals win more games than James Daniels ever could here in Atlanta or now in Pittsburgh. And this is not me sitting here saying that Desmond Ridder is going to somehow lead the Falcons to a Super Bowl like a Joe Burrow, like a Matt Stafford, like a Patrick Mahomes. He's probably a bridge quarterback, just like Marcus Mariota. The difference is that Desmond Ridder's bridge is going to extend for 3 or 4 years rather than the 3 or 4 months that we thought Marcus Mariota's bridge would extend. And the reason for that is because Desmond Ridder's only making $1.3 million a year, ladies and gentlemen, right? Marcus Mariota's making $9 million a year, the same money as Joe Burrow. And if you're not giving Joe Burrow value for $9 million, are you really worth it, right? Right? Desmond Ridder is making $1.3 million a year, ladies and gentlemen. That's Keith Smith money. And I guarantee you, if Desmond Ridder winds up being the 13th best quarterback in the league, that's going to be giving the Falcons surplus value compared to Keith Smith being, the 9th best fullback in the league, or whatever the case may be. And this is part of the reason why you're not going to hear me at any point, guys, pining for Lamar Jackson here on this podcast, as so many Falcon fans have done over the last couple of months. I don't understand it. And to get to this conversation of surplus value, if Lamar Jackson leaves Baltimore, and I've been listening to Locked On Ravens the last couple of weeks to gear up for our upcoming matchup later this week a lot more, and it does seem like this is much more of a plausible outcome, today, that Lamar Jackson may be playing his last games in Baltimore than it appeared to be 4 months ago. But you will never hear me sit here and say, let's go get Lamar Jackson, because why? You're going to have to give up so much to get him. Not only multiple years of premium draft assets, in addition to then making him the highest paid quarterback, because the only reason that he's going to leave Baltimore is because basically Baltimore is saying, we don't want to make you the highest paid quarterback. Lamar is basically saying, I need to be the highest paid quarterback or I'm not signing Jack. And guess what? If the Falcons trade all those assets for him, they have to make him the highest paid quarterback. And I don't see a world where paying Lamar Jackson is $50 million and he's going to be Patrick Mahomes. He's going to be Josh Allen. That's giving you the surplus value, right? Elite quarterback play, MVP caliber quarterback play at that type of price tag. And instead, he's going to be the next Russell Wilson, the next Kyler Murray, the next Browns quarterback, the next Jared Goff. That's not going to live up to that type of contract. So you'll never hear me sitting here pining for Lamar Jackson, right? So anybody out there wants to put their Twitter polls, who would you rather have, Lamar Jackson or Desmond Ridder? I am 100% voting for Desmond Ridder, right? And so this is why, and the reason why I'm going to vote for Desmond Ridder is because the Falcons are in a rebuild, ladies and gentlemen, right? We are not ready to go out there and pay the premium to go out there and get a Lamar Jackson or any of these elite quarterbacks, right? Now, people forget that when the Chiefs traded the year before the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, they were a 2 seed. They were a 2 seed, and then they went and got the quarterback. You've seen that in recent years with the Rams getting Stafford, with the 49ers going and getting Trey Lance. That if you build up a Super Bowl caliber roster and you then say, hey, guess what? The final piece of the puzzle is a quarterback, then by all means, that's the time to go and get you a Lamar Jackson. But we've seen with Matt Ryan and the Colts, Russell Wilson with the Broncos, and the Browns quarterback, right? That is as risky as it seems to be, as obvious a chance, right? But we'll cross that bridge if we get to it. That's a bridge that we're not going to cross for several more years, guys. But in the meantime, that means I'm going to sit here on this podcast and give Desmond Ridder all the love in the world. I'm going to sit here and talk about, oh, did you see the anticipation he had on that throw? Oh, did you see how he, PFF graded him positively against pressure? Isn't this positive signs? Because I understand the assignment, guys. We're rebuilding. And in the meantime, having a rookie quarterback that's going to give you surplus value. So if Desmond Ridder is only the 19th best quarterback in the league, he's going to get far more credit, far more love, and far more of the benefit of the doubt than Marcus Mariota being the 19th best quarterback or Matt Ryan being the 19th best quarterback. And I hope you guys get that now, that everybody should be rooting for Desmond Ridder to succeed here in Atlanta because you understand the excitement. We are rebuilding, and going out there and making this big splash of the quarterback, it's the big sexy move. But while everybody sat here and praised the Falcons, well, okay, off-field stuff aside, I love the fact that the Falcons went out and tried to get the Browns quarterback this past offseason. I hated it, guys. Off-field stuff aside, to me, the Falcons had no business getting in that bed with that quarterback and paying him the type of money that they needed to pay. They're not ready for that. We're years away from that. We're rebuilding, guys. We're rebuilding. And giving up 5 assets and then paying him on top of that money, is it working out for the Browns right now? And the Browns are much further ahead today than the Falcons were 9 months ago. So I don't get why people are praising. That was the Falcons being absolutely drunk, guys. They were drunk. Arthur Blank was drunk. TJ Yates, drunk. Arthur Smith, drunk. Terry Fontenot, drunk. I'm glad these people have sobered up. And so whether Desmond Ridder is the guy or not, we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We're going to hope he's going to be the guy because we understand our eye is on the prize, ladies and gentlemen. We're rebuilding. We're not going to get there by going out there and paying a guy $50 million. We're going to get there by having a cheap quarterback that is good. And whether Desmond Ridder is the 13th best quarterback, the 19th best quarterback, or something in between, that is a positive for this team's ability to rebuild the right way. So we're going to give him that praise. We're going to give him that love that you don't feel like, well, why didn't Matt Ryan get this love? Because he was hurting us with his contract. No offense to Matt Ryan, but like I ain't one of these guys that hero worships Matt Ryan. So if you want to hero worship Matt Ryan and you want to lament about why Matt Ryan didn't get the same love that we're getting Desmond Ridder, who cares? Move forward, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to sit here and be like, why would Marcus Mariota get this love? He's a bridge quarterback. And again, maybe Desmond Ridder's a bridge quarterback, but we're hoping that bridge extends for 3 or 4 years as we rebuild this thing so that we can worry about the problem of, hey, man, why isn't Desmond Ridder performing even though we've assembled the Super Bowl caliber roster around him? We're not even there. We're not even a playoff team, guys. So I wanted to get that straight so that you guys understand, so that you're not in the comments sitting here being having your little civil war about Marcus Mariota versus Desmond Ridder. Whether it's Desmond Ridder, whether it's Will Levis, whether it's Anthony Richardson, doesn't matter to me. Give me a young quarterback that can give me that surplus value, right? And whether he's Joe Burrow or Jalen Hurts or whoever, that's what I want. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm hoping Desmond Ridder can be. But we'll get Mark Schofield's thoughts on it tomorrow on the podcast. We won't do our traditional all 22 review. Sorry, guys. But Mark Schofield's going to come on. We're going to talk about Desmond Ridder, his thoughts on Desmond Ridder's debut. And we'll also get Mark Schofield of SB Nation's thoughts on the upcoming 2023 quarterback class, so we can find out if Anthony Richardson or Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Will Levis or Hendon Hooker or whoever can give us that surplus value that we need moving forward to rebuild this thing. So had to get that off my chest, guys. Apologize for the rant. Please, by all means, provide your feedback in the comments below. Send me an email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at LockedOnFalcons, or hit me up in the Discord, Locked On Falcons, link in the description below. But that's what we need to understand. I apologize for not making that clear for you guys for the last 9 months, that that's really what it's about. So my bad, guys. I'll own that. I'll do better. We'll keep you addressed on and up to date on that status. Are we getting the surplus value from our quarterback? That's why we moved on. That's why we didn't give Marcus Mariota the love. But I'll leave it there. Appreciate it, guys. We'll be back tomorrow with Mark Schofield of SB Nation. Make sure you make us your first listen. Make sure today you make Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Find them all on the same podcast platforms, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts that you listen to Locked On Falcons. Appreciate it, guys. Till then.